Hey everyone, this is Stuart, Victor Echo 9, Charlie Foxtrot, and welcome back to our program. On this program, we bring together interesting people from around the ham radio community. And today, I am joined by Ken Opskar, as pronounced, I think I got it correct, Lima Alpha 7 Golf India Alpha, who joins us today from Norway. And if you guys don't know Ken, he's got a very impressive ham radio resume from the DXpedition world. So if you're interested in getting started in doing DXpeditions or wanting to join a DXpedition, I'm sure Ken will have all kinds of great information to share with us today. So welcome, Ken. Welcome to the program, and thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Stuart. Very nice to be here.
So you just recently completed the Bouvet Island, the 3Y0K expedition. We'll get to that. We'll get to that in a few minutes. But that I remember working you guys. I think I worked you guys on 3 or 4 bands, FT8 and SSB. The signal was fairly good in my part of North America. I know a lot of North American guys had a hard time hearing you for some reason, but I know I heard you great in New Brunswick. Before we get into that, just tell us a little about yourself, how you got started in ham radio.
Yeah, I'm 54 years old, living in Norway. I got licensed in '92 when I did my studies in electrical power engineering in Norway. I came over this Morse code course, and I joined the student club. I was really interested, being a student, and in my spare time I spent all my time with the radio. So that's how I, in a way, was mentored by other people, and I really enjoyed all aspects of ham radio. So it was a great period in my life during my studies. Yeah.
And ham radio, Ken, as you know, has many different channels that you can get into. Some people like to do the portable operations. Some people like to do contesting. Some people like the emergency services part. You chose, indirectly, maybe you get started there, but expeditions, doing DXpeditions and traveling around the world and putting remote places on the air. Looking at your QRZ profile, you've also used that for a lot of humanitarian purposes. We can talk about that in a few minutes here around in Yemen and a few other places. How did you get started in DXpeditions? Did you organize your first one by yourself, or did you join others? How did you get started in this? I mean, I'm fascinated with. I want to do my own as well. I'll tell you a story about that in a second here. But how did you get started in DXpeditions?
Yeah, I started with DXing. That was what I thought was interesting back in '92. But it took a long time before I actually started with DXpeditions myself. I think for the first, almost 20 years, I was a casual DXer. I did a lot of rag shoe on Morse code. I participated in contests. I was chasing DX. That's what I liked on HF. But took a long time for me to actually go on a DXpedition, and it always starts at some point in time, and I wanted to be in the hot end of a pileup, and I applied for a position. Actually, it was Tango 33 Banaba. I think it was in 2012. I wanted to be an operator, so I applied for being a team member, but I was rejected. I was not accepted for the team, so I said, well, I never give up. So that's, I guess, how it all started. I realized that, I don't need to be a member of the expedition team to enjoy myself and go on the expedition. I can go by myself. So that's basically how it started for me. I had opportunity, and I started planning to go my first expedition. It was really exciting to, in a way, know I was going to handle all this by myself. I hadn't been in Africa before, and the thrill of going through the planning phase, getting the license, study the location I'm gonna stay at, and all this was that's actually what brought me into the expedition. And from there, I just kept on going. Mostly I did go by myself. It was quite until recently I started going with multi-operator teams.
So, I've been interested in it myself, and I'm thinking about even doing just like a local expeditions, nothing too fancy, maybe in the Gulf of St. Lawrence, which is probably 3 or 4 hours flight from where I live, and right in the middle of the St. Lawrence, the Gulf of St. Lawrence, between Newfoundland, Quebec, and where I live. There's a chain of islands that's actually part of Quebec called Ile de Madeleine. The Madeline Islands, and you can get there by ferry, and it doesn't get put on the air very much. I can't even remember the IOTA number for it, and it's got some parks on the air references to it. Not a lot of people go there. I'm thinking, as getting my first expedition under my feet, I think something simple like that would be a good place to start. Or Anacostia Island, which is another big island at the mouth of the St. Lawrence River. Something small like that, just to get your make all the mistakes then before you pack up and fly a couple thousand miles. Would you recommend that for anybody who's getting into expeditions. And I do like what you said about doing it yourself, because I feel that way myself, is that, local ham radio clubs and places like that, you can be a member and they don't always have a say in what's going on. But if you do it yourself, then you're in charge.
Yeah, and I think that's a great way of starting. I mean, you can go to a POTA, SOTA activation. I think even field day carries a lot of aspects which is also quite similar to the expedition. I used to say that when I go on the expeditions in Africa, it's like going on a field day in Africa, because basically it's that I choose a location in Africa, or where I go, or it could be other places, of course. But you choose a location and you don't really know exactly what is there. You have to do some kind of research, and it is the same if you go parks on the air or a summit on the air. Maybe you haven't been to that specific summit or park, but there's a lot of aspects which is quite similar to planning the expedition. So definitely that's a very good way to start, because you need to understand, what is the propagation, what kind of antennas can you bring with you, what kind of equipment, are you going portable, you need a generator, you need a fuel. There's a lot of logistics involved even in such events. So I think that's a very good start. And I know that a lot of people, they do this kind of events. Actually, I think Parks on the Air has in a way exploded. There is so many activations, and I think that the trail people, that enjoy. The people really enjoy this kind of events. It's kind of managing all aspects of such events.
Yeah, and your expedition to Bouvet just wrapped up, and Sable Island is going on right now. And, there's a lot happening in the world of DXpeditions. So how do you choose a location to go to? Do you just open up the atlas or go on a Google search and say, where should I go this year?
Well, sometimes it can be like that. I originally started going to Africa by myself. For me, it was a good choice. I don't have to. I stay in the same time zone. I don't have to cross any, go to other continents, which can be some kind of hassle. All the jet lag and all this stuff. From Europe to Africa, it's kind of also not that expensive. You can go on economy tickets, so it's quite reasonable for many people to go on this location. Yeah, so there's a lot of things to think about. But yeah, for sure, that's how it is.
So if you're going to a place like, let's say, Africa somewhere, pick any country in Africa, Namibia. I have a good friend in Namibia as well. He would sponsor me to go down there, no problem. I know he would. But if you're picking a country in Africa to go to, where, what are the typical logistics like? Obviously, you're going to look at reciprocal licensing agreements, if there's such a thing, or getting a license there. What does that process look like to go? Let's say you're going to Chad.
Yeah. That's actually can be quite challenging to get the license, and in many of these countries it's very difficult to get the license. I could just add to the previous question is that in addition we have this kind of ranking list for DXCC. So some countries will be high up on a ranking list, and some countries will be maybe at 50 or 100. But some people, they would just try to go on some of these attractive exotic places, which is higher up on the ranking, because then if you go to like 70, 50 on a most wanted list, then you can get a lot of pileup, which is attractive to us DXers. So yeah, getting a license is difficult. Can take many months. It can take like 5-6 months easily. You have to be really patient. You have to do your research. You need to get in touch with the people who is in the position to give you a license. But not always is it sufficient with a license. You would also maybe need kind of visa to enter that country. You would probably in some places also need a security police clearance to go there. So yeah, it's a lot of these aspects which takes a lot of time, and very often it's difficult to get hold of the person in charge. You can send email, but it doesn't really work in many countries. They don't really answer email, so you need to get to talk to that person. I can mention I've been to Syria many times, license. Back in 2018, I was in touch with them, and they said it's a possibility to get a license. We discussed the location for the transmission and so on, but it turns out it's very difficult to get the license in some countries. Obviously, the best thing is to go to the country, talk to them, the persons who are in charge, to discuss your plans, to understand the culture, the location, and the people, and just meet them. And Yemen was such a place where it was very difficult to get a license. But what works for me is very often to get a local fixer to help you. I had very great success with having local people to assist me, like in Chad, also like in Somalia. I had one local fixer who met me at the airport. He fixed the license, he fixed the accommodations, he fixed all the permits. He speaks the local language. He can easily, if you run into problems, in the airport, during transport between the airport and a hotel, having a person who knows the local language is very, very useful. And, I wouldn't get the license in Somalia or Yemen or Chad without this local contact person, because it makes a big difference when you go on these the expeditions.
And I learned that from my chat with Dave Goodwin. You probably don't know Dave, VE3KG, which is our regulatory affairs officer with Radio Amateurs of Canada. He mentioned that when he was traveling, even to places like Japan and China, leveraging the local ham radio community was essential for him to get a license in Japan.
Yeah, I think that's very correct. And having local people makes all the difference. They can guide you through discussions, meetings. They can bring you where you need to go. And in places like Yemen, Somalia, Chad, Syria, always had local people with me. I've been to Syria twice, and having local persons with me is so important, because they can get you into a situation, but they can also get you out of the situation if things happen. So yeah, always that's always a good thing, to have local people. Even if you go to places like IOTA or SOTA summits on the air, local people can advise you, about the weather, for instance. They know the local weather, what's challenging, what you have to think about, what equipment you should bring, and so on. We have, for instance, in Norway, it's a lot of tourists coming to Norway. They want to go hiking in the mountains, but they have little knowledge or experience with the cold weather. So yeah, a lot of people, they run into issues during winter. During summer, because even during summer it's can be quite cold in the mountains. So before you go to SOTA activation, you should really understand the challenge, the task, the local weather. I think that's kind of important, is to do your research. Even if you go to summits on the air, there can be quite challenging in many places around the world. So I think for me, it had always been that I wanted to do research before I went. I always put a lot of effort into planning the expeditions, because I think that's one of my strengths, is to try to look into all aspects of the expeditions. It could be like logistics, it could be safety, it could be other things, which I always try to do as best as I can and put a lot of effort into it, because then obviously when you come there, you have a lot more knowledge about what you expect to see.
Yeah, and I understand totally about the mountain weather, because I lived in Alberta for 20 years, and just in the foothills of the Rocky Mountains, and we would see people come in July and August and just get totally surprised by a winter storm in the mountains in July. So I know exactly. And funny you mentioned that, Ken. Tomorrow, it's the end of March here, and I live on the east coast of Canada, and tomorrow they're calling for 20 centimeters of snow for the last day of March. So yeah, the weather can be a funny thing. Make sure you always check with a local person, just the local knowledge is so important as well. Like just as you mentioned, understanding the weather, the terrain. If you're going to do a SOTA, the best way up the mountain, the best way down the mountain, when you should go up, when you should come down. And the same would go for going to Yemen. If you're coming to Yemen, here's where you should go, and here's where you should not go. I avoid going to these places and go to these places. And I imagine you're pretty much like I am, traveling on a Norwegian passport or Canadian passport to some of these places might be a bit more easier than, say, if you were from another country.
I think also one of the benefits is that if you're trying to travel as a solo, as a single person, you also very often often goes you go under the radar in one way. I think if you travel in a group, you're quite more exposed to difficult situations. So my experience is that if I travel alone, at least it's I have less difficulties going to some exotic locations like Yemen, Syria, Somalia, and so on. It's always more difficult if you go with other people. Yeah, I think you're more in a way, especially going to some places, it's been beneficial to keep a low profile and just stay low. So.
And when you went to Yemen, I noticed on QRZ it was a humanitarian trip as well as a ham radio trip. Did that play any factor in getting approvals to say, hey, you're going to do this and I'm going to raise money for on a humanitarian cause in the country?
No, not really. I never discussed this with authorities in any of the locations. I've done multiple of these humanitarian projects. I think for me, it's always good to try to give something back. And for this specific project, this actually was some kind of idea that came up when we were camping in Yemen, because we were actually staying in a tent. We slept under open sky in Yemen. We only had a mosquito net to protect us. Otherwise, we slept on the ground in Yemen. We stayed with a local family there in Yemen, and I saw really, how they struggled. Many of these people, they don't have any kind of electricity. Some of the people, they had like a few light bulbs in their house, which is of course very simple construction. They have no protection for the heat. So during summer, it's very challenging for them because the temperature can be quite high. So during our stay, we really got to know the guides. We had 2 guides staying with us. After a week, I really got to know these people. They stayed with us. They slept in our camp. I work as electrical power engineer. I work with offshore wind. Actually, I worked in a U.S. offshore wind project. So I'm kind of renewable energy for me is something I really care about. And I understood that they had solar panels in Yemen. They have like 50 watt solar panel, and you can imagine 50 watt. It was just only a few light bulbs they had. So yeah, we discussed it, and we understood that by providing a donation, we could actually have 10 families could get light bulbs in their house. They also was interested in cooling because of the temperature during the summer. But they don't have kind of air condition. It's just a fan. It's just a very simple fan, which provide them with some kind of air circulation. That's the cooling. They really appreciated all we could give them. So it was very nice to understand that this donation actually was helping the families where we stayed.
When you look at going to Bouvet Island, which you've just finished wrapping up, and you're going to St. Peter Island next year. I think it was St. Paul or St. Peter, one of the two. I can't remember the name of the two, but 3Y0L next year. That comes with a significant cost. I mean, there's I think the last number I saw was $1.7 million to go to Bouvet. How do you fund that? Is it? I'm sure you're not paying that out of your own pocket. You're going to places like DX Engineering and organizations like that for some sponsorship.
I think it always starts with a plan. You want to go to Bouvet Island, or you want to go to POTA 1 Island, but you realize that this is very expensive, $1.7 million or $2.0 million, and obviously we don't have that kind of money. So either you can just give up and do something else, start collecting stamps, or you can try to do your own investigation, try to see. Okay, the challenge here is that you don't have the money, so that's a big challenge. And that's why we, at that point in time, started to explore possibilities how we could fund this. So basically what I did was I started talking to different companies I thought could be interested in sharing the cost. I discussed this with film companies. One idea was that the film companies would like to do a video shoot on this island, but it turned out that it's not so easy to have film companies to fund 50% of the trip. We discussed with tour operators. There's a lot of tour operators going to Antarctica. So one idea I had was that, okay, maybe the tour companies could purchase some kind of ticket or share half the cost for this for a vessel. But it turns out it's very difficult to sign a contract with a tour company, which then should commit to sharing 50% of the cost. So, in a way, is that okay? We have a plan, but we need to fund it, and that's a challenge. And I think, from my perspective, I just kept going. I investigated a lot of possibilities. I later on then got in touch with a private group which has the financial capacity to fund their part of this trip. So that's basically how should I say how this trip actually is the reason why we could go, is because we find someone to share the cost with. And I think for Bouvet, I spent like 3 years planning this expedition. 3 years of planning. I can honestly say that I every day was doing something related to the planning of this trip. I think what I've told people is that, the radio part is just like 1%. Get me on the island, and I know we can ham radio operators. We can install a camp. We can set up the antennas. That's not a problem. I think I told people that 95% of this trip to Bouvet Island or POTA 1 or any kind of big expedition is about the funding. It is about the contracts, and it is about logistics. You need the money to go there. You need a contract, a vessel, and a helicopter, but you also must be able to handle the logistics of getting all the people and all equipment onto the island. Once you are on the island, then
That's the easy part.
that's the easy part. Yeah, everybody knows how to install an antenna or set up a radio. That's not a problem.
Yeah, and I mean, looking at that, even you got to think about medical. Like I heard stories of, I think one of the guys at expedition came down very, very ill. So do you have a ham operator that's also a doctor as well with you?
Yeah. So yeah, exactly. So that's a very of course, when you go to these places, you would like to need to have some emergency doctor with you, but it's not that easy to find a ham radio operator, who wants to spend money going to these islands, So yeah, but in the end, we managed to get actually a couple of doctors in the team, the support team, and it's very, very crucial to have medical personnel with you on these remote locations. There's a lot of things that can go wrong. Of course, you can have heart attack. Of course, there's a lot of things that can happen. But I think the highest risk for most people on these islands is actually simple accidents like slip, trip, and fall accidents. Especially on Bouvet Island, we had like I would say like 40 to 60 knots of wind most of the days. It can be very dangerous to do even simple maintenance of antennas, antenna masts, and so on. So yeah, having some kind of medical persons on the team is very much needed, I would say.
And doing an expedition like Bouvet would be like a huge undertaking, you can imagine. But just get back to the small one, taking a trip or going on a vacation. I've seen that a lot now. Is when I read the DX news every week. They're doing these holiday style expeditions now. I'm going to the Caribbean, so I'm going to take my radio and do some ham radio. A lot of that's going to be a big trend that I see now. So an expedition can be something as simple as that, or something grand to scale as what you did with Bouvet. If you look back on all the places that you've been, Ken, where would you say was your favorite place to go and why?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I had that many times. I think maybe the trip I remember most was actually going to Jan Mayen. It's a small island northwest of Norway. I spent 5 years trying to get the permit to join a military flight to this island. It's very difficult to get access to this island because there is a military station there, and there's also a meteorological station. So I spent 5 years asking for, is there a seat available? Can you bring me to this island? And I gave up. But one day, actually, the person in charge in the military, he called me in the office and said, look, Ken, tomorrow we have a seat on the military flight to Jan Mayen. And I said, well, I just started a new job contract a few days ago, so I can't go and ask my boss for permission to join you. So I said, but if there is a possibility, just call me next time. So, well, then 3 months later, he called me, Ken, we have a seat for you tomorrow. Do you want to come? And I said, sure, I'll be there. So the next morning, he just told me you have to be in the airport hotel at 6 a.m. the following morning. And I of course I went home. I packed my radio and amplifier, and then the next morning at 6 o'clock I was at the military airport in Oslo, and I had a ticket to this military flight, and we went to Jan Mayen, which is northwest of Norway. It's a very small island, and it was a day trip. It didn't cost me anything. The military paid all my expenses. The only expense I had was to purchase a Coke for like $10. That was the only, and had so many good memories. I arrived at this island. The flight time was like about 5-6 hours, and you never know if you're gonna land until you actually try, because the weather condition can be so difficult that they actually can just return back to Oslo. But luckily they landed, and I was running out of the aircraft. It was a Hercules aircraft, and he just pointed in the direction where I was going to stay. You're gonna stay up there in the airport cabin, and I just run there with my plastic bag. I had a plastic bag with antennas, and I was there for like 5-6 hours. My best memories actually, because I spent so much time begging for a place, and when I finally got there, it was so freezing cold on this island. I had to choose between heating the cabin or using the amplifier, and of course I chose to use the amplifier, but then I also had no heating, so after 5 hours I was really freezing. So but I got back in Oslo late in the afternoon, in the evening, so it was a very good trip for me.
That reminds me of my trip about 1.5 years ago. A friend of mine and I did a small expedition to a little island in the Bay of Fundy called Grindstone Island. Now, it's not a grand expedition like you're describing here. I think it was a 45-minute trip in a Zodiac boat from the shore to the island. And from a POTA perspective or an IOTA perspective, it was never activated before. So, and the band conditions were not great that day, but it was just a day in, day out. The Zodiacs took us out at high tide, and we waited. And I don't know if you know much about the Bay of Fundy, but the tidal swings there are huge. It could be 50 or 60 feet tidal swing. So we had to obviously wait for high tide to come back to go back out again. So we had a good day out there running some ham radio there. It was just kind of like your experience. I didn't have to do any licensing. I used my current license because we're still in Canada and things like that. It was a lot of fun. And we had a good time with it. But it was just a small little expedition like you're describing here, where you went off in the plane. And I never thought about the military angle. I'm ex-military, so I should look into that and say, hey, you know what? next time you're going somewhere unique, if there's a spare seat on the Hercules, can I go? I've flown on Hercules before, so I know exactly. But I did. I wouldn't even classify it as an expedition. But back in 1992, I was in Cyprus with the military, and we operated as 5 Bravo stroke, and I was a VE4 at the time. So we operated a 5 Bravo stroke, but that was a lot of fun for 6 months. We did that. We didn't know back at the time. I think we broke some reciprocal agreement rules at that time, but we were in the military, and who's going to argue with us? But Ken, so if you had to give some tip to somebody like me who is very interested in expedition, we talked about, let's just check, you're organizing yourself. It's just you, maybe a couple mates going out to do an expedition. What tips can you share with them to make sure it goes smooth?
Yeah, there is, of course, depending on the kind of location you're going. I think you need to determine where to go. Basically, if you want to go on a DXpedition, but there's so many places. I think if you go on a DXpedition, probably you like the pilot. You like DXing, and then there is so many places you can go. I think it's a matter of finding good friends you want to go with. Someone who enjoys the same thing as you. I think that's could be beneficial if the 2 of you, or if the 3, 4, 5 guys, whatever, is that you already know these guys well, is good. But other than that, is the license and all this stuff is difficult. You can talk to people who have been there before. A lot of people they get in touch with me. They want to know how I got the license in Somalia or Congo or Chad, and I openly share information. If somebody wants to have a license in Somalia, they probably can get this tomorrow. I think it's all about this, having connections, talk to people who have been there before. If you're going to planning an expedition, they very often have useful information. It could be about local conditions, could be places to stay. Some hotels are in a way, want to meet and greet new ham radio operators. Some hotels, they don't want to have this antenna on their property. So yeah, getting information from other people. If you go to an island, for instance, you don't know the condition, you can probably end up on the wrong side of the island with behind a mountain, for instance. So your signals could be blocked. I think
That didn't happen recently.
so it's all these small tips. I think the more time you spend on understanding why you're going there, what's your motivation, what's your goal. I mean, do you want to do some kind of holiday stay? You want to do some sightseeing, or you want to do some hardcore DXpeditioning where you sit like 18 hours a day. So having a common goal, I think, is important, that you talk to your friends, so you all understand. If two guys want to go on holiday style and the other two guys, they want to do hardcore. So I think having a common goal is always good.
You mentioned pileups too, because I haven't mentioned that yet. Because when I did Worldwide Award in January, a friend of mine messaged me, says that's the closest you're going to get to a pileup that to an expedition. It was pretty brutal. I always tell the Parks on the Air people, if you want to get into contesting, for example, do a lot of Parks on the Air and understand how to manage those pileups, because those are just a real good training ground for that. And then contesting obviously would be the second kind of step. When you go to expedition, you got hundreds of people calling you, and what's the best? You mean your operating split? I get that. That's a basic tip. But what else can somebody do to get prepared for that? Because once you experience the onslaught of a pileup at something like a Worldwide Award, it's a bit of an eye opener. Somebody who's not used to it can get really overwhelmed.
I remember my first pileup. I was in Malawi in Africa, 7Q, and I sat in front of the radio. I always wanted to be in a pileup, and then suddenly it was like boom! It was so many people calling. And then I realized I couldn't escape. I couldn't just leave the radio because there was so many people calling. And I really learned something, is that the pilot can be quite huge from some places like Bouvet or other places I've been to. Been a massive pilot. I think going on a Park on the Air activation, Summits on the Air, do a lot of contests. Also, there's a lot of software you can actually train on your computer. You can run Morse code runner. If you're into CW, you can run different type of programs. I think for phone is actually just going there. Don't have so in a way high expectations. It's in a way allowed to run a slow pileup. You don't need to run like 5-6 QSOs a minute just because you're going to some exotic location. So just don't panic. There will be so many people calling you, I think, but knowing a little bit about operating strategy, how you work the pilot is good. But I think the best practice is actually going there, and nobody expect you to be some kind of expert after one DXpedition. You need to do many DXpeditions. You need to build your experience. You need to do contests, and I think that's basically what you have to do. And after some time, you'll certainly manage to handle the pilots. I think for CW pilots can be quite intense. There's a lot of callers, but I think also depending on what kind of radio you choose, some radios have very good filtering. So bringing a radio which is good can assist you in managing the pilot. If you choose maybe a cheaper or radio without all these filterings for CW especially, then you're running into difficulties. Of course, you have the digital mode like FD8 and this mode. So yeah, that's also very, very fun mode operating. So yeah.
Yeah, I notice a lot of expeditions now are doing a lot of Super FOC FD8 now, which is I think multiple streams at one time, which is really, really, really nice to see. One of the things after the event's all done, you guys are in that phase now, and I'm waiting for my logbook of the World Confirmation information to come through. QSLing, things like that. Obviously, I know from looking at the website, any sponsors will get their their QSL cards or logbooks of the world confirmations, things like that. Or you can go through, I think it's Club Log as well, and do it that way. How many requests do you manage for that after the event? Okay, I need a confirmation of this contact from either my DXCC or worked all zones or whatever.
Yeah, that obviously depends on on where you went, but what kind of DXCC. But many years ago, I did all the QSLing myself. I had a lot of direct QSL to my mailbox. I could have like 500 mail QSL cards a day. It was really exciting to go to my mailbox and check. And I even had my family assist me in that. Later on, I realized it's so much work actually. So I got my own QSL manager. He does a really great job. But yeah, and also with LOTW coming, it's less work, but it's a lot of QSL requests. It can be like 2,000, 4,000, 5,000, 6,000, depending on the number of contacts you had. So managing all these like 5,000 QSL cards is a lot of job. Yeah.
How many contacts did you guys end up with at Bouvet this year? At the end of it, have you counted them all?
So we had like 102,000 contacts. We had 25,000 uniques. I think by now we have almost like 4,000 QSL cards.
Wow, that's
so yes, a lot of job if you want to print the QSL cards with correct information. You need to put this card into an envelope. You need to bring it to the post office. Yeah, you can just imagine the amount of work.
I just like Club Log because people could submit it. I don't need to send them one to get one back. I just put my information and they send it off, and I like it. I really don't even want the card. I just want the LOTW confirmation. Really, that's me. Because I get so many QSL cards a week that I don't. In the old days, we used to hang up on the wall and put them in books. Today, I didn't sit in a box, right? At the end of the day, but
actually, my check I have actually my wall and is actually covered by QSL cards because then I don't have to paint anymore. I can just have my QSL cards to look at.
I keep the unique ones like from the unique places, but the other ones, I keep them in a box now. But that's just the way it is. They got thousands and thousands of them. Yeah. So Ken, hey, thanks for taking some time out of your day to come and talk to us about this. I really appreciate all you do for the ham radio community. I really like you to go to zone 34 for me because I need zone 34 for work call zone. That's the only zone I need.
Well, let me think about it.
the Egyptians, and I think that covers a little bit of Sudan. There's another country that's in there too, but not very active on the. I didn't even work them once during the contest this weekend, so okay. That happens. Anyway, Ken, yeah, thanks for doing that. I'll keep an eye on FT8. I heard there's an Egyptian that's very active on FT8, so we'll get it that way. Ken, thanks again for doing this. I really appreciate it. If people want to learn more about your expedition for next year, is there a website or anything up for that yet?
Yeah, there's 3Y0K Lima.no.
Okay, so you can check that out. Is that a Norwegian territory as well?
Yeah, of course. It's a Norwegian island, so let's see. We're in the planning for that the expedition. So yeah.
And so there's really no worries about getting visas or anything. You just got to get permission to go to the island, right?
Yeah, we do have the permission. So it's more like planning the logistics and all this stuff, which of course takes a lot of time. So
perfect. Ken, again, thanks for doing this. Really appreciate everything you do for the ham radio community. And check out 3Y0L.nl, I think the website is. Check that out and get ready for that one next year. I'm looking forward to it.
Thanks for having me on the show. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone. And stay tuned and make sure you comment and subscribe to the channel because we love your feedback. We got some great shows coming up here in the next little while. So make sure you subscribe. And we'll see you guys in the next episode of Ham Radio Insights. See you guys next time.